Howdy my totally tubular gamers, we're back with, you guessed it, another ranking video. Thanks for coming back to the channel. If you're new here, maybe stick around for a while. I got a fun ranking video for you. Probably a pretty divisive ranking video. We're going to be ranking 3D Zelda games. Yes, it is finally that time to talk about the 3D Legend of Zelda games, starting with Ocarina of Time all the way to now Tears of the Kingdom. We are going to be ranking the 3D Zeldas from worst to best. I'm going to be giving each one of them a little review, stacking them up against each other, which ones have the best story, which ones have actually aged pretty well and are still good nowadays, which ones should you skip. Spoiler alert, none of them. I'm going to be ranking these games. I've been a long time fan of the Legend of Zelda series. I've been playing it for over 15 years now, and I've been looking forward to doing this one for a while. I've been taking my time on it because I really wanted Tears of the Kingdom to sink in before I ranked it with the other Zeldas. And it's been over a year now. I think I'm ready to rank the 3D Zelda games. I'm also talking about only the mainline 3D Zelda games, so you're not going to see like Hyrule Warriors here. What you will see is Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, Breath of the Wild, and of course Tears of the Kingdom. Today really is just the 3D games. Maybe in the future I can rank all the 2D games or every Zelda, but at this time I haven't played every Zelda game. I still actually haven't played the Minish Cap, but that's for another day. Now, I know making a list like this, everyone and their mom's gonna come out of the woodworks, out of the basements, out of the sewers to come and disagree with me. I know I'm putting a target on my back here, so all I'm gonna say about that is it really doesn't matter what order I put these games in. Someone's gonna disagree with me, so let me know down below how you're feeling about this list. Let me know if you agree or if you think I have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm gonna be lurking down there below. I always love reading the comments. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. I got the Patreon and the super thanks. Any support is truly, and I mean truly, appreciated. Like, thank you. If you even made it to this part of the video, thank you so much. I hope you have a great day. Let's get into it. Of the 3D Zelda games, which one is the worst? And air quotes on worst. And so here we have Skyward Sword, which originally came out in 2011, but I'm playing the HD re-release from 2021. I never actually played the original game. I was just kind of done with my Wii by then, so I'm glad it was re-released and I finally got to play all the way through the game. And after playing through it, I actually thought that it was pretty good. Do I think it's the weakest of all the 3D Zelda games? Yeah, but this is also the 3D Zelda games, where it's some of the greatest games of all time. So the story actually takes place at the very beginning of the Zelda timeline and details the origins of the Master Sword, and really is about Link, a resident in this floating town called Skyloft, sent out to rescue his childhood friend Zelda after she is kidnapped and brought to the surface, which is really these abandoned lands below the clouds. So a lot of this game takes place, up in Skyloft, but a majority of the game is on the ground. I think the story, while it starts out pretty slow and the pacing is a bit slow in this game in general, I think the story really kicks it up and does get quite interesting. There are some really great side characters here that are kind of underrated nowadays, especially like Groose. And I'm actually going to give some props to the world building here. I thought the world building of Skyward Sword was really good. Again, the pacing, it can be a bit sluggish at times, especially near the beginning, where I was just like, come on, when is it going to start really picking up? And yeah, it does take a little bit to pick up, but once it gets going, it really does get going, and I enjoyed it by the end of it. When it comes to the gameplay, it plays pretty similar to most 3D Zelda games, traditional 3D Zelda games I will add, only there are some differences here. I think the biggest point of contention / selling point was the control scheme of this game. When it originally launched on the Wii, it was really relying on the motion controls, and that was one of the reasons I didn't really want to play it. And playing it on the Switch, where everything is just linked to buttons, what a concept. It's actually a lot better this way, in my opinion. I didn't have any issues with the controls and it was smooth throughout. So the core gameplay loop really, like I said, it's not too different from traditional 3D Zelda games. There's two parts to exploring, and really you'll explore around, complete quests, progress the story, and get into dungeons, boss fights, encounters, all of that fun stuff. When you're exploring around Skyloft, you can fly around on the bird, and I think the flying is fine enough. It's not too intrusive. It's not as in-depth as, say, Wind Waker's ocean. There's not a ton to see in Skyloft, but there's some areas you can fly around to. A majority of the exploration really is on land, where it's much more traditional, where you'll be exploring around, solving puzzles, getting into some fights with some basic enemies until you finally find a dungeon. In that dungeon, you solve more puzzles, you get a new ability or some kind of tool that Link can use that will allow him to finish that dungeon, and then you can actually go back to previous areas and use the tool to explore new areas or continue along through the story. And of course you'll get into plenty of boss fights here. There's also plenty of side quests for all the classic Zelda upgrades like heart containers, pouch upgrades, etc. Okay, so maybe the format and progression isn't the most, I guess, innovative for the Zelda format, but something that Skyward Sword really hammers in on is its combat actually. Since, you know, it was so reliant on the motion controls and now the right analog stick, the combat is a lot more involved in Skyward Sword than really any other Zelda game up until this point. And oftentimes it feels kind of like a puzzle on how you're going to defeat some of these enemies, and I think this is actually a pretty good little wrinkle they throw in there to keep things interesting, and it keeps the combat interesting and ultimately the game interesting, and I thought it was fine enough. I know some people really disliked how the combat is in this game, but I think it was fine. But while we are on the subject of disliking things, I'll tell you what I dislike about this game. First off, Skyloft, it can feel a bit empty and it feels like it's a little undercooked. I feel like there could have been more here, maybe that's just me. But then there's also the backtracking. I really just didn't care for the backtracking. You have to go back to like all the areas and really just explore a bunch more to them. You spend a lot more time in them, and I just didn't really care too much for that. I would have rather had new areas or just kind of had the game end, and it feels like it can kind of drag the game out. It wasn't bite-sized and fun like Link's Awakening. No, it really is a lot of going back to the first, second, third area and doing everything over again, new dungeons, new abilities, all of that. And you know, some people are like, really, you're gonna say that the game's too long or there's too much to the game? No, I wouldn't say that. I just didn't really care too much for the pacing ultimately is what it was, and that's just kind of throughout the whole game. I just thought the game was just a tad slow, even for a Zelda game, and I'll be real, as I was finishing up, I was like, man, I'm glad that Zelda really changed things with like Breath of the Wild, because this old traditional Zelda format, it just felt like it was getting a little stale and a bit tired, honestly. Now don't get it twisted though, Skyward Sword is still a great game. You just gotta really know what you're getting into. The game still looks great, it has good music, and it's still fun to play, and I still did really enjoy my time with it. And if you didn't try it because of the motion controls, there's no excuse now. Just play it on the Switch, it's fine, and I do recommend it. And here we have Majora's Mask, which came out initially for the N64 in 2000, but it was remade for the 3DS. Funny enough though, all these years later, I've still never tried the 3DS version. It certainly looks pretty though. Majora's Mask is probably the weirdest of all the Zelda games. Its development history was weird, and the entire game just has this incredibly unsettling vibe to it that no other Zelda game has even ever attempted. Like, this is a weird, creepy game. I mean, the mask itself, this shit was in my nightmares as a kid, especially when it's a stage in Melee for one of those events. Anyway, I'm getting off topic here. Seemingly taking place after Ocarina of Time, it sees Link going through these woods as he searches for an old friend, but he ends up in this parallel world known as Termina, and gets dragged into this world-ending quest to prevent the moon from crashing into the planet. He's also trying to stop this evil, mysterious thing known as the Skull Kid. The plot, like the rest of the game, is just really strange and unsettling. I mean, the moon has a giant face and is ready to kill everybody. The Skull Kid, the main antagonist, is just really out there. Again, that mask, man, that fucking mask. You know, a lot of people say that Ocarina of Time is a very traditional Zelda story. Majora's Mask is like the opposite. It is like as far away from traditional as it gets. Like, it just has such a strange plot, and some of the characters are some of the weirdest characters you'll find in not only any Zelda game, any Nintendo game. All these years later, I'm just like, man, what the fuck was up with some of these characters, like the Happy Mask Salesman, and just several other NPCs that show up throughout the game. But man, this game's vibe is so good. There is no other Zelda game that is able to capture this kind of strange, quirky atmosphere, and I love it. It is the definition of unforgettable. I can still very vividly remember that atmosphere, and more importantly, the emotions I felt while playing this game. I was creeped out, I was weirded out, I was intrigued though, and I really wanted to see what was going to happen, and all these years later, oh, it still absolutely has that. Majora's Mask's vibe is just fantastic, and the story along with the characters and really just what happens, oh, it's great. It's some of the best storytelling the series has ever seen. And when it comes to the gameplay, it's also a bit different from all the other Zelda games. It is a 3D Zelda game at the end of the day, and it still is very much structured like one, where you have to explore a decently sized overworld. You can help out other individuals with their tasks. There's a few little mini games that show up, but sooner or later you'll end up in one of the game's dungeons where you'll get a new ability, use said ability, fight a boss, and then move on to the next dungeon. But the way I just described Majora's Mask is honestly a bit reductive. There's a lot more to this gameplay than that. Sure, I guess it could boil down to that, but you'd really be forgetting the game's biggest gimmick, the whole 3 days time. You really only have 3 days until the moon crashes into the earth and then you have to reset everything with the ocarina. These 3 days really are perpetually repeating, and yeah, you can find songs and tools that help slow down those 3 days, but you're constantly on a timer. The entire game is on a timer. I know people that don't even like missions that are timed, let alone the entire game. And yeah, part of me doesn't like the 3-day timer. I mean, it puts a lot of pressure onto everything you're doing, and it really can create a dynamic atmosphere where you really got to manage your time. But I don't know, that stress as a kid really just bummed me out of this entire game, and I actually never finished it until I was way older when I could deal with the timer and the stress that comes with it. Even with slowing down time, like, you still have to manage your time, and a lot of the game's puzzles and characters, especially the side quests and helping out all of the other characters, they're all tied around the 3 days, where characters follow certain schedules. On this day they'll do this, on this other day they'll do that. It's kind of like Shenmue. It's not as advanced as Shenmue, but it's a lot more practical. There's a lot more puzzles and just general interactivity than Shenmue. The other big gimmick about this game is the masks. It is called Majora's Mask, and you get plenty of masks in this game. Some of them even fully transform Link, like you start the game pretty much with the Deku Scrub mask, where you're stuck as a shitty Deku Scrub who shoots bubbles and bounces on water. Eventually you get like a Goro one, you get a Zora one. These are awesome. You get plenty of other little gimmicky ones as well, like the bunny mask that allows you to run super fast. That's just one example though. There are actually a good amount of masks in this game, and if you want to fully complete the game, you're going to need to get every single mask and do all of these puzzles and all the side content, so then you can get that fierce deity mask everyone loves. But good luck doing that without a guide. Majora's Mask is easily the most cryptic of the 3D Zelda games. As a kid, I had no freaking clue what the hell I was supposed to do pretty much right from the get-go. The game barely gives you any instruction, and at times it feels like it barely tells you anything. It just kind of gives you a general objective and just throws the keys to you and says figure it out. A lot of this game is trial and error, especially when it comes to helping out all of the townsfolk or doing any of the side quests. I tried to figure this game out as a kid and had to go to GameFAQs. As an adult, I just go to GameFAQs immediately. I mean, it's fun and all to really explore and get yourself immersed in this world, but repeating the 3 days over and over and over to try to do some of these puzzles, it gets old. I don't know if what I just said is a super hot take and heresy. I just didn't fall in love with the whole 3-day structure just because, yeah, there is a bit of trial and error here. Now, when it comes to the dungeon design, I do actually think it is pretty good. This game has the least amount of dungeons of like any Zelda game with only 4, but these are 4 massive, detailed, dense dungeons, and they really do take advantage of the masks in interesting and different ways. I actually really do like all 4 of them, and I think all 4 of the boss fights are great. The masks are great, the puzzles are solid. The fights are epic and memorable, and I feel like Majora's Mask could be described in that one word: memorable. Everything about this game is incredibly memorable, from the premise, the setup, the structure, the side quests. I still remember tons of shit from this game, like when the aliens abduct the cows, or how you have to go put your money in the bank, otherwise you're going to lose it. Like, this game is just incredibly memorable thanks to a unique premise, story, art direction. Seriously, the art direction is really solid in this game, music, and again, just how different it is from any other Zelda game. While I don't think it's perfect, I don't think it's the best of the 3D Zelda games, I don't love the time mechanic to its fullest, I can appreciate what this game does, how it was a bit ahead of its time, and sure, at times it can feel rudimentary and archaic, but coming back to this game was still an absolute joy. And the music, it is so good in this game, it deserves special mention. Like, I still listen to it nowadays. It's just really great. Majora's Mask is absolutely a game that is worth playing. If you like Zelda, if you like 3D adventure games, just be prepared to probably get lost, confused, and unsure of where to go next, so maybe a guide on hand will be useful. Either way, this game is totally worth playing and is truly an N64 classic. And here we have Twilight Princess, which came out initially in 2006 for the Wii and GameCube. Now, I very much remember getting Twilight Princess almost 20 years ago, back when I got my Wii, along with Link's crossbow training, and suffice to say, yeah, I like Link's crossbow training more.
Shut the fuck up!
But once I was done with that masterpiece, I moved on over to Twilight Princess, and Twilight Princess is one of the more interesting Zelda games. While I wouldn't say it deviates all that much from the typical 3D Zelda formula, I think it is very refined, and I still think it's an incredibly enjoyable experience nowadays. After a quite lengthy intro, the game is about Link, who's trying to save Hyrule from being engulfed into this parallel, corrupted dimension known as the Twilight Realm. Along the way, Link gets dragged into the corrupted dimension and gets transformed into this wolf, and he has to team up with Midna to stop the evil emperor known as Zant. but there's a bit more to this story than that I'm not going to spoil. I think the story of Twilight Princess is actually really good. I think the story of Link and Midna teaming up is great, their relationship is great, the main antagonist is interesting, and that's all I'm going to say. I think the story of Twilight Princess is good. I think the world is nice. It actually feels very developed and lived in, and the game can get decently dark at times. And I still like to this day that, yeah, the game's atmosphere and vibes are different from really any other Zelda game. Sure, it's not as dark as Majora's Mask, but it still is relatively dark, and the game has plenty of excellent, memorable moments and characters. And there are some really emotional moments in it that, yeah, I'm not going to spoil, but I'll just say this game might have made me shed a tear. The story's good in Twilight Princess. When it comes to the gameplay, it isn't vastly different from the other 3D Zelda games. After, again, a pretty lengthy intro, you're dropped into a decent sized overworld and are told you need to collect something. How you're going to do that? You're going to go find dungeons. Along the way, you'll get into combat with plenty of foes, you'll solve a bunch of puzzles, you'll get some new abilities and gadgets, you'll fight a boss, complete dungeons, collect MacGuffins, help out random people, go fishing because Link likes doing a bunch of bullshit, defeat the bad guy, yada yada yada. Okay, I'm sounding a bit reductive again. But if we were breaking the gameplay down, that really is how everything shakes out. There are plenty of improvements to this game from previous games. The combat is a bit better than, say, the Wind Waker's. It's more fluid, there's more options, and the AI is a little better as well. It feels like they're a bit more reactive than prior Zelda games. I think the combat's fine. I was playing with the Wii Remote, so I get the motion controls, and the motion controls are actually pretty decent in this game. They've aged well enough. You can play the GameCube version, which is also good, but this is one of those rare instances where I think the motion controls kind of do enhance the game a little bit. Not like a ton. I don't think it's amazing because of the motion controls, but it adds to it. I like it. And something else I like in this game are the puzzles in the dungeons. There are 9 dungeons in this game, and these are some really big dungeons. Some of the biggest dungeons of the entire series, and they're all very memorable, and there's plenty of good puzzles throughout. You'll also get some new gadgets you can use in them that of course you then have to use in the dungeon and then beat the boss with, and I think all of these are really good also. Another wrinkle to the gameplay that makes it different from other Zelda games is playing as Wolf Link. Wolf Link can't use any items and can only really bite things when it comes to combat, but he actually has several other abilities, like you can track stuff, dig holes, and actually jump pretty far as well. Playing as Wolf Link is not a hindrance at all. It's not annoying, and it actually adds to the gameplay. And I think it's a good original twist that is very much needed in this game. While I don't think the game is boring or anything like that, sometimes it feels a little by the numbers and like it's on autopilot for a Zelda game, where you're kind of just going through the motions at times, where you're like, okay, I've done this a few times in other Zelda games. Maybe that's just me because I've replayed a bunch of these games several times, but I think Wolf Link really adds to the gameplay, adds to the variety, and changes things up. And then the last thing to mention for the gameplay is the overworld and the side content. When it comes to games from this era, I feel like Twilight Princess is one of the biggest actually. The game has a ton to explore, with lots of secrets, mini games, and side content. Of course, you can get all the heart containers, you can help everybody out and do all of these fun little mini games. Not all of them are fun, but most of them are fun, and you can really just find yourself immersed in this world for quite a long time. I think the first time I went through this game, it was over 40 or 50 hours, and I mean, up until this point, that was a pretty long game, especially for a Zelda game. Yeah, it was a pretty lengthy game. And this game, yeah, it sure does feel lengthy. While I like a lot of Twilight Princess, I like the dungeons, I like playing as Wolf Link, I think the combat is better, I do have one gripe with this game, and that is the pacing. The pacing is relatively slow in this game, like way slower than any other Zelda game. It's the main reason why I haven't played all the way through this game again. As a kid, it feels like it took forever to get through the intro to this game. As an adult, yeah, it still feels like it takes forever to get out of the intro. It feels like you're in the tutorial for several hours, like you even do a dungeon in the tutorial. And yeah, by the time the game finally opens up and really lets you explore and do your own thing, it's awesome, and I think the pacing really picks up after that. But those first few hours, it just can feel like an eternity at times. And it's not bad, it's not boring, it's just not all that exciting. And if you compare it to several other 3D Zelda games, it's not even as exciting as those. And you know, maybe I'm in the minority, maybe I'm just a really impatient person, but I think the intro just takes too long. I know some people love how it really takes its time and it builds everything up, but for me, I was just kind of like, can we get on with it? But don't get it twisted. I'm not saying this game is boring or bad or unexciting or not worth playing. None of those. I still think the game is absolutely fantastic. I just don't think it's perfect. Something else I think is fantastic is the presentation. I was blown away back in 2006 by this game. I thought it looked incredible, and I still think it looks pretty good nowadays. It definitely has that mid mid-2000s Instagram filter on it, but aside from that, I think it's a very good looking game. The character models are good, the environments are great, and then the music is excellent as well. The music's actually really good in this game, and I feel like it's kind of underrated these days. I don't hear a lot of people gassing the soundtrack up like I do with several other Zelda games, and yeah, I really like the soundtrack to Twilight Princess. Overall, I think TP is a great game. I think it's one of the best Wii games, one of the best GameCube games, and is absolutely worth your time. It doesn't reinvent the wheel for 3D Zelda, but it refines it, and it's generally good at what it does. If you like Zelda, if you like 3D action-adventure games, it's absolutely worth playing. The game has been re-released, and I think that it is very much worth your time. Just be prepared to be on that intro for a good while. And here we have Breath of the Wild, which was the Switch launch title back in 2017. I was there pretty much from day one. I was like, I gotta get this Switch, I gotta play Breath of the Wild, and Breath of the Wild really changed the game for Zelda. Like, what Breath of the Wild did is pretty crazy for Zelda. It changed a lot for the entire franchise and how it has been going forward. The story is really basic, like NES basic. Link wakes up one day, an amnesiac I might add, and is told, hey, Calamity Ganon's here with all of his monsters trying to destroy Hyrule. It's up to Link to save Hyrule and save Zelda and stop Ganon. That's literally it. That is it when it comes to the story. There's some other characters here as well. There's the Divine Beasts and all of that, but the story is just very simplistic, basic, easy to understand, and you know, maybe this is just one of my ultra hot takes, but I've actually never really cared for the story of Breath of the Wild. I just didn't like how basic it was and how lacking a lot of the story elements were. Again, maybe that's just me, and that's probably my biggest complaint with this entire game, is that I just wasn't big on the story. But let's talk about the gameplay. It's very different from any other Zelda game, honestly. So basically, after this little tutorial area, you're just dropped into this giant, and I mean giant, environment, and you can go do whatever the hell you want. This game is about as non-linear as it gets. You can go do really anything. You can go anywhere you want. You can do any of the objectives, whether they're main or side. You can even just go fight Ganon immediately if you want. Like, the level of freedom you get in this game is just unseen in video games. Even still 6 years later, like, it is really unseen. It is crazy how much freedom they give you. So let's talk about what Link can do. Link can do a lot in this game. He can run, he can climb, he can jump, he can swim, he can glide with this paraglider he gets, and it's all linked to this stamina system. Now, there was stamina in Skyward Sword, but this is much more expanded on, much more serious, and it's actually a real gameplay mechanic, is the stamina system. Another huge part of this game is scavenging. You'll be scavenging items from the environment like weapons, food, and a bunch of other resources. Unlike previous Zelda games, your weapons and shields, they actually degrade through use, and they can actually just totally break. Weapon durability is huge in this game. I know a ton of people don't like it. I actually don't mind it. I think it's fine. I think it keeps things actually interesting and raises the stakes. I don't actually mind it much. A bunch of these items, and really the whole world, is so interactable. For instance, wooden weapons can be lit on fire. You can actually ride shields down like hills. There's lightning and thunderstorms that'll show up, and those will actually strike electricity. There's weather effects to worry about besides that, like if it's super cold out or if it's super hot out, Link will start to get hurt. You can actually cook food. In this game, it feels like a survival game at times, outside of, say, like a hunger meter. And then Link has the Sheikah Slate abilities. He has a couple abilities in this game that you get right at the beginning of the game, and that's what you have this entire game. They really give you the tools right from the get-go to do every puzzle in the game. Whether it's creating ice blocks on watery surfaces or stopping objects in time, these abilities are really what almost all of the puzzles are centered around, or the game's physics, which are actually pretty solid in this game. There's combat as well, and the combat is fine enough. It's not as advanced as Skyward Sword with that puzzle element, but there's a bunch of different weapons. You got to worry about durability and what you're fighting, and I think the combat is more than fine enough, actually. I think it can be pretty engaging, and at times it can get pretty challenging, and dodging stuff at the right time will give you this whole Bayonetta witch time. You can even parry in this game. I think the combat, yeah, it's fine enough, and you can actually totally use the physics to take out enemies as well. You can throw rocks onto enemies, and there's just a bunch of little fun things you can do with the enemies to defeat them. Another huge part of this game is the shrines. All across this huge open world, again, huge open world, are these shrines. These are basically mini dungeons with puzzles in them, usually involving one of those abilities I just talked about, and by the time you get to the end of it, you will be given a spirit orb. You get so many spirit orbs and you can upgrade your max life or stamina. Once you get 13 hearts, you can actually go get the Master Sword, which does not break. It has a recharge, and so if you really don't want something to break, you can use that. But what it really comes down to is exploration. Like, this game is so keen on its exploration. You can go, again, anywhere at any time, any way you really want. You can get to places in so many different ways. There's like these towers that, you know, show everything on the map a la Far Cry, but then you can jump from them and glide down, which is always going to be fun. And there's just a ton of things to climb. You can climb just about everything in this game. Like, seriously, you can climb so much. Whether you can get to the top depends on your stamina or not, and if it's raining, your ass ain't going nowhere. But this game is just incredibly dense. You'll find yourself exploring for legit probably like 100 hours, and you still feel like you haven't seen everything that this world has to offer. Sure, some areas aren't the most exciting, and there might just be like a Korok seed or two, but there are plenty of areas where there's a bunch of stuff, whether it's materials, enemies, or something else to explore. And then, you know, there's probably a shrine or two hidden in there. Like, there's just a lot here. It can honestly be to the point of intimidating how many different options you have. And, you know, there's those main missions where it is a little more, I don't know if I'd say scripted, but it's a little more direct in how it wants you to approach it. But you could still really do a lot of these missions just about any way you want, and that really is what it comes down to. You play how you want to play. If you want to do all of the main missions, you go ahead and do them. If you want to just fight Ganon immediately, I mean, you're going to have a tough time, but you can go do that. You can explore as much as you want. Like, this game is as long as you want it to be. And I have to say, I think it's just an incredible experience. I think the game is just fantastic. While I don't love every single aspect of this game like some people do, I still think that it is just a superb experience that is absolutely worth playing if you have a Switch. It really is just one of those must-play Switch experiences. And here we have the Wind Waker releasing for the GameCube in 2003. Call it my nostalgia-fueled choice, but this was actually the first Zelda game I ever played. I played it almost 20 years ago and fell in love with this game. I've played through it several times since then and have enjoyed it greatly every single time. It's one of my favorite Zeldas, one of my favorite GameCube games. Really, it's just one of my favorite games of all time. When it comes to this game's story, it has a really simple premise at first. He just lives on this remote island when this bird shows up and kidnaps his sister. And so he teams up with this mysterious pirate named Tetra to go save her, and yeah, things really escalate from there. I think the story is excellent in this game. Sure, it's not the most complex, and at times it can be a little predictable, but I really do love this game's story. I love the characters, the vibe, the atmosphere. Like all these other 3D Zelda games, it has pretty much its own unique vibe, aesthetic, and setting. The game just has a totally different tone, it feels like, from really any other Zelda game. I just love the characters, the world, how everything looks, and it really brings me back. Like, I just remember being transported into this magical, imaginative world as a kid, and I play it nowadays, and I absolutely still get those vibes. I'm still able to get engrossed into this world, the setting, the aesthetic. It's all so good. And speaking of how the game looks, it's kind of funny to me nowadays that this was somewhat controversial that the game goes for a cel-shaded approach. It's thanks to that cel-shaded approach that the game still looks excellent nowadays. The game has very good lighting, environments, the character models are great, the frame rate's awesome. Like, the game has a ton of personality. And the Wii U version looks even better. The lighting is like incredible in that game. It's a very good looking game. Nobody's going to deny the presentation here, and I think the music is some of the best of the entire series as well. I love the music to Wind Waker, really all of it. But you know, when it actually comes to playing the video game, I think it's very good as well. It isn't some massive overhaul from Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. It tries to do something different with the formula. Yeah, you are dropped into a pretty big open world, but you're not riding Epona this time. You're on the sea. You get a boat. You're sailing everywhere. You have to actually pay attention to the wind, otherwise you're not going to get anywhere fast. You're not going to get anywhere, actually, if it's really against you. You even get a little magical instrument that is not an ocarina. It's like this little baton known as the Wind Waker that allows you to actually control the wind, time of day, and is used for several other puzzles. I think the Wind Waker's pretty cool, actually. And yes, of course, while you're exploring this big open world and investigating the sea and seeing all it has to offer, eventually you'll have to go collect some MacGuffins. You'll go into a dungeon where you'll fight plenty of enemies. You'll get some kind of new upgrade, ability, gadget, tool, etc. And then you'll use that to finish the dungeon, fight the boss, collect something, and then move on to the next dungeon. The combat is very similar to Ocarina of Time, where you lock onto enemies, and it definitely feels nicer than what Ocarina of Time had, which can feel rigid at times. The enemies aren't super smart and there's not a ton of variety here, but the combat is fine for what it is. At least the bosses are memorable and kind of epic, especially that final boss. I love the final boss to this game. It is just such an epic, memorable moment. Anyway, before I accidentally spoil things, the combat is good, the dungeons are very well designed, and are legit some of the best dungeons this franchise has ever seen. They're full of memorable moments, there's some interesting puzzles, they really utilize your moveset a bunch, and they're just, again, memorable. They stick out, and every dungeon tries to do something different. It's very much appreciated, and it adds to the variety and keeps things interesting, and I find myself constantly engaged. And then there's plenty of side content to do. You can explore all of the sea, and it will take you a long time to see everything, pun intended.
Shut the fuck up!
And exploring around is just so much fun in this game. I know some people don't really care for the sailing, they don't like exploring all the islands, but that is not me. I loved exploring all the islands, I love seeing everything this game has to offer, doing all the side quests, trying to get all the heart containers. They're all very rewarding, engaging, and nothing feels like filler. All of the side content feels relatively meaningful, and again, it's memorable. A lot of things are very memorable about the Wind Waker, more than just the aesthetic or the simple story or Toon Link and all of the screaming he does. There's a bunch more to this game that is memorable. It's one of those, as corny as it sounds, just magical experiences that I wish I could experience for the first time again. And so needless to say, I absolutely recommend the game. If you haven't played the game yet, oh, you are missing out. This is just a fantastic game. It's one of the best Zelda games ever, and again, it's one of my favorite games ever. Call it a major nostalgia bias, maybe it absolutely is. I mean, I could just be infatuated with this game because of nostalgia, but even nowadays, I still think the game is really great and really is worth your time. And so here we have the latest 3D Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, releasing in 2023. It's like they took Breath of the Wild and made it even better. It's one of those like perfect sequels where they took what worked with Breath of the Wild and made it even better. They tweaked it, improved it, added to it to create just a phenomenal experience. When it comes to the story, I'm going to just say right off the bat, I think the narrative and the story and the world are a lot better than Breath of the Wild. The game takes place right after Breath of the Wild, and spoilers here, Zelda and Link get together, as in they hang out, and they go under the castle to explore this alleged gloom that is really affecting Hyrule, and I'll leave it at that. And Zelda and Link get separated, and it's up to Link to again save Hyrule from something totally different here. Again, the story is just immediately interesting. It's a lot more in depth than the first games. There's a lot more characters. I found it just intriguing right off the bat. Everything from the way it's presented, the writing, the dialogue, the voice acting, to the actual characters and just how the game progresses, at least as far as I've gotten. I just like it a lot more than Breath of the Wild's. Breath of the Wild's like, you know, I wasn't a big fan of it, but I thought it was still alright. This is great. I actually really do like the story and the characters and the world in this game, and I think the world building, which was good in Breath of the Wild, is even better here. And they've even got some references to Age of Calamity, so if you're a really big fan of that Hyrule Warriors game, well, you'll like that too. But immediately right off the bat, I'm going to just say that's a lot better. When it comes to the presentation, the first thing you'll see about this game, it also is quite a bit better than Breath of the Wild. Now, I didn't really mention the presentation for Breath of the Wild. I mean, it's pretty good. It's cel-shaded. I think that it looks generally still decent nowadays, and it ran pretty well on the Switch. Tears of the Kingdom looks even better. I mean, it's not going to blow you away like God of War or Horizon or what will be Spider-Man 2, but it still looks really good. And I think it's still really impressive. Sure, there's some low-res textures thrown in there. Sometimes the models don't look amazing. Sometimes the frame rate can be a little jumpy and drop to like 20 FPS. It doesn't really hinder my experience with this one. I think the game still looks pretty good, and the frame rate was never to the point where it was like a nuisance or anything. And Zelda isn't a game that requires 60 FPS or even a incredibly consistent 30. It's just not that kind of game. Unlike, say, Redfall, but that's a story for a different day. So when it comes to the gameplay, you know, if you played Breath of the Wild, you're going to feel really at home here. Link can do everything that he could in terms of his core abilities. You know, there's a lot of climbing here, swimming, gliding with the paraglider, running, jumping, all of that's the same. But instead of all the abilities he had from the first game, you know, like magnet, freezing, all of that, he has new abilities. And these new abilities are actually pretty different from the first game. It's a lot more on the building side of things, so you can actually fuse items to your equipment, you can actually put stuff together, and you actually have to create a lot of stuff here. You can rewind time on objects, send them backwards if say they were moving forward. You can basically jump into the ceiling and pop out the top of it, and just so much more. And I'm gonna just say right now, you know, the abilities in Breath of the Wild were really good, but these really allow you to just customize how you want to play the game. Like, the game is just as open with its puzzles and solutions as Breath of the Wild was, but now you have potentially even more options. Like, it is crazy what you can do with some of these abilities. Like, the amount of freedom and just creativity you are given for these abilities is like, I've never seen something like this before. I know a bunch of people were like, oh, this kind of looks like nuts and bolts or whatever. Nuts and bolts ain't shit. It ain't shit compared to this game. Like, the creativity and freedom you have to go around these puzzles, to explore the world, is just unprecedented. You thought it was open in Breath of the Wild with solutions. Oh, this game is even more open somehow with its solutions. Now, problem solving is something I do on a regular basis for work. I think most people do, but problem solving is actually a huge part of this game, and it's actually fun, unlike the real world. It's actually engaging, it's a good time, and it's really fun to get creative, and it's actually incredibly satisfying when you figure something out, or you go like, I can't believe the game let me do that, and that actually worked. Like, it's amazing. I could go on all day about the building and creativity you can have with this game, but there's more to it than that. The combat returns, it's pretty much the same as Breath of the Wild, or at least feels similar enough. Durability is back, and the way that the combat really just works is basically the same. And so if you didn't like Breath of the Wild's combat or the durability or any of that, well, that's just here to stay and tough shit. But I think it's fine. What's really cool is you can actually, again, add materials to your weapons. So you can totally attach like bombs to your arrows, or you can attach a giant rock to like one of your sticks to make it a rock stick. And there's a bunch of crazy combinations you can have, and I feel like I haven't even scratched the surface when it comes to those. And speaking of not scratching the surface, we have the world of Tears of the Kingdom. Now, if you thought Breath of the Wild was big, you haven't seen nothing yet. So Tears of the Kingdom has pretty much all of Breath of the Wild in it, and then it adds the sky area, and it adds the depths as well, where you go really deep underground. And this game is just absolutely massive. It is absolutely gigantic. Like, this game is just one of the biggest games like ever made when it comes to its open world. It is just humongous. There is so much to see, so much to explore, and so much of it is handcrafted also. This doesn't feel like stuff's randomly placed down either. It really feels like they handcraftingly developed and tried out every area before, you know, just plopping it into the game. Like, this really puts a lot of those open worlds where stuff is really just kind of copy pasted all over to shame. Like, this is all very unique, it's different. I haven't explored all of the open world yet. I don't know if I ever will because it's just so big, but like, everything I've seen so far is incredibly handcrafted with superb open world design, where you can still approach just about any area from any way you want. You can climb just about everything still. Unless it's raining, then your ass still ain't going anywhere. The shrines return, they're just as good as the first games. There's now these caves to explore, which are like mini dungeons. There's a bunch of upper areas in the sky that are also not worth missing, and are also, again, incredibly handcrafted. Like, this game, it's going really hard. All this in the world is still just as interactable as ever, with some of the best physics you will find in any video game. The exploration, how engaging the game is, the sense of discovery, the sandbox feel, and just how big that sandbox is. This game goes nuts. It goes so hard with its open world. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if this goes down as one of the greatest open worlds in any video game ever. Like, games coming out after this game are going to have a really tough time ever even coming close to how great this open world is. And Breath of the Wild had a pretty amazing open world. Somehow they made it even better. How? I'll tell you how. They added a bunch of new, interesting, engaging mechanics, areas. Like, there is just so much going on with this game. But honestly, I don't want to spoil like anything. After 100+ hours with this game, it truly is incredible. If you like Zelda, if you like action-adventure games, or maybe you haven't booted up your Switch in a while, this is absolutely worth playing. It is truly a masterpiece that is worth your time. And here we have the coldest take imaginable, like Alaska cold, Antarctica cold, under freezing weather conditions cold. We have Ocarina of Time, which I believe to be the best of the 3D Zelda games and likely the best Zelda game of them all. Now yes, I'm very aware people have been gassing this game up for 20 plus years now, calling it the greatest game of all time, the best of the Zelda games, and there's not exactly a lot I can add to the discussion. And certainly nothing new, but what I can throw in is my own personal experience with the game. After playing through the Wind Waker, I really enjoyed it and wanted to try another Zelda game, and so I tried Ocarina of Time. And like Wind Waker, I absolutely fell in love with it. I actually fell more in love with Ocarina of Time than I even did with Wind Waker. And I just found myself crazy immersed into this game. I remember being at school and just going, gosh, I just want to play Ocarina of Time, or finishing up school or doing something else that wasn't playing this game, and all I wanted to do was play Ocarina of Time. I wanted to see everything, find all the game's secrets, experience as much as I could. I wanted to leave no stone unturned, and that's absolutely what I did. I remember playing this game for months and months, and then replaying it again because I enjoyed it so much. And then there's the 3DS version, which is definitely the definitive way to play this game thanks to superior graphics and especially controls, but the original game has still aged incredibly well. It's still very playable nowadays. Sure, graphically it's not the most impressive or all that flattering, but I think it still looked pretty good for the time, and it has just a ton of charm and care. And call it my nostalgia for these graphics at this point, but I still think it looks nice and I can appreciate the aesthetic. And when it comes to the controls, it's certainly not the most ideal. It's going to take some time to get used to the N64 controller, but you very much can get used to it. It's not the worst thing on the planet, and it does feel kinda nice at times. And you could always just play this on an emulator or one of the re-releases for better controls if you really don't like the N64 controller that much. But what were some of the things that really intrigued me and got me so invested into this game? It was the story, the gameplay, the world, and the music. The story isn't the most out there. It certainly is a bit traditional for Zelda, where it starts with Link as a kid and then he goes on an epic adventure, and that's all I'm really gonna say. But I just found myself so into this world. I wanted to see every aspect of it. I wanted to talk to all the characters, really get to know every location and see where the plot goes. And then when you jump forward into the future, I remember being blown away as a kid. I was like, whoa, we're older now and everything's all fucked up and it's totally different. And I went back to areas I had previously been in and it was like super different. I thought it was really cool. Nowadays, yeah, it's not the most impressive, but I still think it is pretty awesome. And I still think the game is very easily able to get its story, characters, world, and atmosphere across, even with it being all in text and the dialogue and the writing not being the most advanced. But I think the storytelling is really great here. I think the story's good. The way everything continues and progresses is great. The characters are solid enough, the antagonist is great, and it's just a really good story that I don't think will ever leave your mind if you play all the way through this game. It's one of those stories that will stick with you forever. This game's atmosphere, aesthetic, presentation, all of that, I also think is going to stick with you forever. It just has a very unique, distinct, imaginative, magical aesthetic that it just sits with me and I love it. I can't help but not just smile or get that warm fuzzy feeling when I see it or hear music from it. I mean, the music is just god tier. The music is so good in this game. It's unbelievable how good the music still is. I love the music and it helps evoke those emotions that I felt all those years ago when I was a kid. And again, maybe the nostalgia really is just hitting me super hard with this game, but even after the latest Zelda games, all the Zelda games after Ocarina of Time, none of them hit like Ocarina of Time did for me, and I just think it's great. When it comes to the gameplay, they really took the 2D Zelda gameplay and put it into a 3D world where there's a big overworld to explore. You usually got to go collect something, you go into some dungeons, and you know how all of this goes. I've said it a few times in the video already, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of people down below going, he just repeats the same thing over and over. It's almost like these games kind of have the same formula, but regardless, I think the formula is at its best here. The combat, while it is a bit simplistic and it can be rough around the edges, I think is still very playable. It's still good nowadays. Some of the enemies are really freaking creepy in this game also, and it scared the shit out of me as a kid, and even nowadays I think it's a bit unsettling, but the combat, it's fine. The puzzles I think are very good. They utilize your moveset well. You get plenty of new abilities, tools, gadgets, upgrades, etc., and I think they are all well utilized here. And then when it comes to the dungeons, I think almost all of them are just fantastic. They're all some of the best dungeons the series has ever seen. There's plenty of excellent puzzles. The pacing's great. They don't go on too long. Obviously, the water temple can just eat a dick and is still super annoying all these years later, but I mean, that's only one bad dungeon, and I wouldn't say it's totally unredeemable either. I think there are good points to the water temple. The boss fight in it is actually really cool. But the dungeons are great, the combat is solid, the puzzles are great, the overworld is a joy to explore, all of the side content is really engaging, rewarding, and fun, and you'll want to see everything this world has to offer. Like, all these years later, I think this is some of the best side content of any Zelda game. Sure, there are some mini-games and the controls certainly take a bit of time to get used to for most of these, but I think the mini-games are alright, and I just found myself always doing as much side content as I could in this game. Every time I played through this game, I set out with the goal of doing as much as possible, even collecting all those stupid tokens. It is, in my opinion, very much worth it. Is this the perfect video game? No, absolutely not. There's no such thing as a perfect video game. I could point out issues, cons, flaws with every single video game ever made. That's just how games are, but I still think Ocarina of Time is one of the best games ever. All these years later, it still is a phenomenal experience, and it's one of those games that I think every single person on this planet should try at some point. No matter what kind of video games they like, I think they should try Ocarina of Time. Not everyone's gonna like it, and I'm sure there are plenty of people that have played it nowadays and go, I don't get what all the hype is about, this isn't that good. And you know, if you feel that way, you feel that way, but at least you tried it. I think it is a game everybody should try. It's one of my favorite games of all time. I've been just gushing this entire video, but I mean, I really don't have many bad things to say about any Zelda game. They're just some of the most high quality video games ever. Video games don't get much better than The Legend of Zelda, especially the 3D games, and all of these games are very much worth playing. Honestly, all of these games are so close to each other in ranking outside of Skyward Sword that my ranking barely even matters. Like, all of them are worth playing, they're all fantastic games at the end of the day, and I believe they are all worth your time, especially if you're into like action adventure games or role-playing games. I really just can't imagine somebody playing really any of these games and going, wow, I hate this sucks. My response to that would be, I'd love to know your reasoning, but I've been rambling way too long in this video. I need to end it. I need to go back into my cage, my hole, my cave, whatever you want to call it. So if you made it to this part of the video, comment cave. That is our secret code word that will get you a heart from me. Hope you all have a wonderful Christmas. See you all later. Bye-bye now.